Welcome everybody to a special interview of Insight Aviation. Today I'm very happy to welcome Lieutenant Colonel Tim Sutton, B-2 stealth bomber pilot, former F-15 pilot. Tim, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hello, thanks for having me. Glad to be here. Yeah, like you said, Lieutenant Colonel Tim Sutton. I'm currently stationed at Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri, about an hour east of Kansas City. At Whiteman Air Force Base, we have the B-2 stealth bomber, and that's what I fly. And I also fly T-38s on the side to help increase our hours. And I've been here about 10 years off or on with my wife and 4 kids.
Congratulations. That's quite a way to make a living. And it's really interesting because you reached out to me not that long ago, honestly. And we, on this podcast, this YouTube, wherever you might be watching this, we've mostly focused on commercial aviation. So I was really interested just to kind of, as we have this conversation, to find out more about the Air Force, how they recruit, how they train their pilots, and what it's like to actually, be an Air Force pilot, which we'll get into, as we go through this interview. Now, for everyone that's watching, whether in the Zoom, on our Facebook Live, or on our YouTube channel, please take a moment to write in the comments or in the chat where you're from. We love to know where you're from because that gives us a better idea of how to answer your questions and where to take them. Whether it's in the comments or in the chat, please let us know where you are. So I always like to know, Tim, right at the beginning, how did you get interested in aviation?
Okay, my story isn't all that exciting because really what got me into aviation was my brother, who was 9 years older than me. Oh. And he was one of those that was passionate about aviation from a young age. And he had 10 posters plastered against the wall of fighter aircraft and all kinds of aircraft from the military, and loved going to air shows. So he introduced me to the concept. And then for myself, I loved sports. I love competition, and I love roller coasters. And I thought it'd be really cool to fly fighters and go upside down and shoot things. And so let's give this thing a try in the Air Force.
That's excellent. All right. So yeah, the big influence of siblings, of parents. I find there's generally 2 kinds of people in the world of aviation. People that had kind of like aviation exposure through their family, and there's people who just kind of out of nowhere, just always loved airplanes and kind of went in that direction.
And I would say it is interesting then too, we did not come from a background per se like that, either for the military or aviation. From Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, it's not a large military area, so there's not a lot of familiarity with the military. And so in this case, my brother was able to do that and got the bug, got the passion because of something he saw from a young age, even though he didn't come from that environment.
So a little bit of both. And is he still in the world of aviation?
He's not now. He retired from the Air Force after 20 years and now works for a defense contractor, helping design and sell aircraft and other systems.
Nice. So he's still very much in the aviation industry and spent a career in the Air Force as well. Very nice.
Yes.
That's great. So it's kind of funny you mentioned early on liking roller coasters, because I actually did some aerobatic extra 300 training a couple of years ago. And the place that I went to kind of sold it. That's out of Vegas. I can't remember what they were called, but they build it as a roller coaster without rails, right? So when I went for a ride, he's like, "Oh, real pilot. Okay, let's kind of like show you how we do it instead of just taking you along for a ride." And I gotta imagine there's nothing quite like being in an F-15 and hearing those turbines roar, right, pushing it around.
My first flight was incentive flight in a fighter was before I went to pilot training. I had to flight in the backseat of an F-16.
Nice.
And, this is a totally new world. Our human pink bodies haven't experienced this type of thing growing up. You know what I mean? It's totally foreign to us as biped humans. And I got in the back of the F-16 not knowing what this future would be for me. And we did dogfighting 1v1. And I just remember sitting back there giggling, going, it's everything I thought it would be. This is so cool. I'm going upside down and turning against this guy.
So clearly you kind of had an entrance into the Air Force through your brother. Was there much recruiting, or was it just kind of like you showed up to the office and ready to go?
Recruiting from the Air Force's perspective, that was not involved. It was me knowing that this looks like a cool path for me. So I went out and looked for the ways to apply to get into the Air Force as an officer. Now, to give a little bit of background on, if you don't mind, on some basic academics on the military, then kind coming from Pittsburgh, we had such little exposure to the military that some of the most basic things I didn't understand. So I'll throw out a couple things at the risk of insulting those who do know. The military is divided up into officers and enlisted. And enlisted are those who go to war and fight, right? You think like 200 or 300 years ago with Napoleon, or that 2,000 years ago with the Spartans. You have a whole bunch of guys that go fight. And who are you going to get to go fight? You're going to need a whole bunch of young guys because they're more fit. You want guys because they have more muscle mass and they tend to not think as much before they go do silly and daring things. And guys without families. So those were your soldiers. And that's what was our enlisted. And now you need a few more educated cerebral types to lead them. And those are your officers. In the Air Force, however, our officers are actually those who are pilots. So to become an officer in the military, to be a pilot in the Air Force, you need to be an officer. And to become an officer, you have to have a degree and some officer training. So the three basic ways to do that are the Air Force Academy, which is a 4-year college where you march and wear a uniform and learn your military customs while you're going to college. Or you can go to the college of your choice and attend Air Force ROTC, which is a couple classes and some training while you're in college. And then finally, if you already have your college degree, you can go to officer training school. So for me, I had to go out and search on the internet or wherever to find out how to apply to those means.
And which one of those three routes did you follow?
In my case, my brother went to the Air Force Academy and I actually got accepted to the Air Force Academy, but I chose to go to ROTC instead so that I could go to the college of my choice.
Excellent. May I ask, where did you go to college?
Yeah, Cedarville University is a small school near Dayton, Ohio. Has about 2,000 students and has a really solid engineering program. So that really worked for me.
Well, Dayton's a big Air Force. It's got the Air Force Museum there. It's a big, beautiful museum. Yeah.
Yeah. That was a real perk having that nearby during college and ROTC. A lot of cool things to see there.
My wife's from the Cleveland area, Akron, Cleveland area. So when those big drives up from Florida there, I had made a point, like we had to stop in Dayton, the Wright Memorial, Wright Factory, and the Air Force Museum, which just blew me away. 4 huge hangars filled with everything. There's like a whole Air Force One wing. It was really interesting.
Yeah, really is. One of my favorites to see there is the XB-70, which is designed to be a supersonic long-range strategic bomber in the Cold War, should we need to, against the Soviet Union. And we actually canceled that program because we got a hold of a MiG-25 from the Soviet Union and really realized it wasn't quite as good as we thought it might be. So we canceled the program to save money. They also have, if you want to see the B-2, they have kind of a B-2 there. It's not really a B-2 because it was never intended to fly. It doesn't have engines, doesn't have avionics, but it's a frame that they built to test strength and such. So you can get a glimpse of that if you go there. That
was it. All right, great. Yeah, I remember that. And they had like 2 SR-71s, which blew my head that they had not 1, but 2. Yeah, that was a great museum, great place. I highly recommend it to anybody that's watching there to visit Dayton, Ohio and check out that Air Force Museum. So we're coming back to your training, right? So you go to college and you join the ROTC program, which is really interesting because one of our favorite schools down here in the Florida area is Florida Memorial University, and they've historically had a great Air Force ROTC program, and students have gone through it. We've had a chance to work with some of them. Actually, shout out right now to Malcolm, if you're watching, who got his private pilot license with us, so that he could then apply to the Air Force Academy and have that leg up. But I don't recall what his route was. It wasn't ROTC. He already had a college degree. He was getting his pilot's license so that he could apply, I guess, for officer training. That's the other route?
OTS, Officer Training School. It's about a 3-month school that you go to if you already have your degree.
Oh, that's not bad. And is it pretty even recruiting across those 3 branches? Or, I imagine the academy, of course, is probably a main one.
Yeah, typically in many years ago, you would, it was so competitive to become a pilot that you would increase your chances of becoming a pilot in the Air Force by going to the Air Force Academy. Mm-hmm. However, these days, I believe they need pilots enough that if you're doing well on your grades and performing well, you have a great chance of becoming a pilot from any of those avenues, commissioning sources.
Excellent. Yeah, I remember it was very exciting when he got accepted because the whole school was cheering for him. He was a good guy, working at, as many people do, part-time, flying here, stops and starts for like 2-3 years, something like that. But it's nice to find a young person that has that clarity of vision of what they want and is so dedicated to it, to work a job, save it up, go in like an hour, a flight time at a time to get there. So very nice. And you said you majored in engineering in Cedarville?
Yes, mechanical engineering. And that helps you as well. They tend to prefer those with a technical degree. but I have also had friends with political science and history degrees who became fighter pilots.
Interesting. In the commercial world, we kind of joke that you don't really need a degree to start your career, but if you want to go for the majors, you need a degree in anything, even underwater basket weaving, right? Just
right.
to show that you can put in the time and the effort to get a degree.
That's right.
So that's really interesting. So I always liked that idea. When I was young and, you know, kind of deciding what direction I was going to go, the Air Force was really the only one of the branches that I took. Because you know, I'm a flying family. My father's a pilot, my brother's a pilot. And so the Air Force really loomed there. I didn't have the military in me.
Yeah.
I went an entirely different route, actually. But I always thought that was very interesting that everyone in the Air Force is an officer. Everyone has to have that kind of college experience. And if you think about it, the job is working with some of the most advanced, complicated things that humanity's ever built, right? So you need a highly educated pilot force or soldier, right, to be able to control something like what you're flying, the B-2, right? The kind of crowning achievement of military engineering.
Yeah, that's right. And now, of course, if you aren't, you know, for those with other paths in life that flying is a hobby or something like that, not everybody in the Air Force is an officer. All the pilots are officers. And of course, if you want to be a maintenance mechanic, you like working with your hands, anything like that, you can be enlisted as well. You can be a dental technician. You can be in finance. There's so many things you can do in the Air Force as enlisted or lead those organizations as an officer. But yeah, all the pilots are officers as well.
That makes a lot of sense, actually. Now that I think about it, I met somebody years ago at a seminar for something or other who said he was in the Air Force. I'm like, really? What do you do in the Air Force? He's a plumber. I was like, yeah. They need everything, right? They need electricians, mechanics, administration, all those kind of things, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. Just a quick sideline for those that are joining us directly in the Zoom. This is a little bit of a different Zoom. It's a webinar Zoom. So we have a functionality here for Q&A at the bottom of the screen. And for anyone watching us on Facebook, please share your questions here for Lieutenant Colonel Tim Sutton. Towards the end of our interview, we'll have an opportunity for questions and answers. If you have anything particular you want to ask. And as always, let us know where you are. So coming back to it. So you're there, you enroll, you know what you're doing because you're in the ROTC program in Ohio. Did you choose Dayton because of its connection with the Air Force?
No, like I said, in ROTC, you can go to almost any college across the country. And that's not too far from my home in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My sister blazed the trail for that, went to Cedarville ahead of me. And I was interested in going to Christian school as well. And it was just convenient that it happened to be near Wright Pat Air Force Base. Sure. And now we're at ROTC. You don't know what your job is going to be yet. So you start off ROTC for your 4 or maybe a 3-year program, not knowing that you'll be a pilot just yet, and you'll have to compete for that. Sure. So you could come out of ROTC as an acquisitions officer, or a lawyer, or something like that. But hopefully you compete and get a pilot slot, and then you'll go off and get commissioned. Now you're officially in the Air Force as an officer, and then you go off to pilot training for a year where you get your wings.
Mm-hmm. That's great. So you go through a 4-year program. Were you flying at all during college, or you didn't do any flying until you got to the flight academy?
I did just a little bit. I did 4 hours in a Cessna because I didn't know the whole scoop. And for the most part, they teach you everything you need to know. Although they will send you to get your private license before they send you to pilot training. They may have adjusted that a little bit. They will give you some private training ahead of time to make sure that you can handle at least a little bit of the aviation.
Sure.
But I wanted to make sure that I had some experience on my resume. And as you can imagine, anything in life that you can pursue more of, make yourself better at, get experience in, it's going to set you up much better in the future.
I agree. So a couple hours, 4 hours in a Cessna there, it's kind of seeing if you can handle it, right? And I encourage anyone that's interested in a career in aviation, no matter what level, go to your local airport, local flight school, and get a discovery flight. In that 1 hour flight, you're going to know if you love it or hate it. Right? Some people love the idea of being a pilot, and then they get into a 152 or 172, and they're like, oh, it's a little bit smaller than I thought. Like, you know, well, like, how do you control the jets on this thing? And yeah, so I mean, of course, if you come out of it with a smile, you really don't want to do anything else. That's really right. We go from there. So
although there are some individuals though that toughed it out, even when they didn't quite. There was a mixed smile because they get airsick.
Oh yeah, yeah.
But they were still determined, and they went through training to fight their air sickness, which is incredible that they had the stamina to go through that.
Yeah, we've had some great people. I can think of one gentleman from Venezuela who was wonderful. Never got over his motion sickness. His intention was to become a professional pilot through our professional pilot program. Got to his private and said, okay, that's it for me. Got my private. I haven't been able to get over this motion sickness. He went home with his private pilot license. But if you want to work anywhere in the world of aviation, whether it's airport management or things like that, even having a private pilot license, that line on your resume, just shows your applying for more than a job. You have a true interest in aviation and something you want to pursue. But then so you took that little bit of experience, your college education, ROTC, and did you go to the Flight Academy in Colorado?
Yeah, so United States Air Force Academy in Colorado is the military academy for the Air Force. Like I said, it is a 4-year college,
okay.
But it is also a military academy. So you wear a uniform and make your bed real tight and learn about military customs and courtesies. So that is not a flight academy. That is just the military academy to become an officer in the military.
Okay.
Once you're in the military, once you have completed your Air Force Academy 4-year degree, or completed your ROTC training at the university that you've been in, or completed officer training school after getting your degree, then you are now in the military commissioned as an officer. Then from there, you'll get your first assignment, and usually that first assignment then is to flight training, to your flight academy, if you will. And the Air Force has 4 bases for pilot training in Mississippi, 2 in Texas, and 1 in Oklahoma. And then that is a 13-month course to get your wings as a pilot in the Air Force.
Nice. So what's the kind of equipment you learn on at one of those bases?
I learned on the T-37 and the T-38. The T-37, including the actual T-37s that I flew, was designed and built in the 1950s.
Sure.
They have since retired it. If you go to the Air Force Museum, check it out and look at how old it is, and you say, I know a guy that flew that thing.
Very nice. I actually just met somebody that privately owns one. I met him at Boca. Shout out to the Wings and Wheels fashion event that they did a few weeks ago. And beautiful blue T-37, keeps it in excellent shape. JD out there, he does like spin training and aerobatic work in it. And what a beautiful plane. I looked at it, at first I was like, what is this? Like, I couldn't quite make out what it was. But what an interesting plane.
And now they've replaced that with the T6. It's a single engine propeller aircraft. Maybe more fun to fly because it's got a better power, to weight ratio. And so now the first half of pilot training is the T6. Then you'll track select from there to either go to the T1, which is if you're going to go more towards a heavy aircraft, cargo type of aircraft, you go to the T1 for the second half of pilot training. Or if you're directed more towards fighters, you'll go to the T-38, which is a pointy-nosed 2-engine afterburning aircraft.
Very nice. Is that like the L-38, the Albatross?
No, very different from the L-38, although the T-38 does have a version called the F-5 that some countries use as a fighter, where they added a gun and some missiles.
Yes, I just looked it up here on the side window. Beautiful plane. I guess I'm going to have to figure out how to insert those images after post-production. Really, I always find it really interesting how the military has its own designations for what might otherwise be civilian airplanes. Like the 737 is was it the KC-135? I'm getting this wrong. No, I am.
Yeah, the KC-135 is a Boeing 707 airframe.
707.
Yeah, so we have a handful of different aircraft that all were developed from the Boeing 707.
Sure. No, that makes a lot of sense. So flight school is 13 months, right? Do you do something similar to like the traditional private instrument commercial, or is it something entirely different?
It starts off similar, and some people have said, what makes pilot training so hard? And a couple of things are the standardization that they expect of you and the level of performance. Some of it is the timing. You can take your time getting your private license if you so choose and get it in a few years, in 100 hours instead of 45. But we would do an introductory phase where we solo in a few sorties, and then we would also do formation. We'd also do low level. So some of those, so we had our basic contact and aircraft handling phase, our basic instrument phase, but then you introduce some other things that are unique to the military.
That's gotta be, I have to admit, I haven't done a lot of formation flying. And I think I did one where we had a photo shoot, and the entire time I'm like, they're too close. They're too close.
Yeah, it can be nerve-wracking, especially early on.
Right. No, absolutely. Absolutely. And low altitude, that makes sense because you're doing a lot of kind of like runs. Like, what do you mean by low altitude? Are we talking about like lower than 500 feet, like
yeah, pilot training was 500 feet, and then it depends on what aircraft you're in. So the A-10s, they may get down as low as 300 or 200 feet above the ground. And now keep in mind too, when we're at 500 feet, we're going 350 knots. You know, and the A-10s, they may be doing 200 or 250 knots. The F-111, it flew low level back in the day, and of course, it was going much closer to the Mach than either of us.
Yeah, that's got to be pretty exhilarating to be that just seeing everything go by as you're low level. So these training stories, I've heard this before, that you had to solo in the Air Force by like, I think 10 hours or 15 hours, something like that, or
that's in the ballpark. I think it was 10 or under. Yes.
10 or under, you weren't going to make it. That's funny because is that something that still holds probably an initial private pilot, 10 hours or under?
Oh, as a private pilot, you're saying?
Well, I mean, no, when you're doing your private prior to flight school in the Air Force.
Okay, yeah. I don't honestly know what the current policy is, but yeah, they have a program like I described it, where they do expect you to get to a certain point within a certain number of hours to show you can handle the pace.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. That's, the private pilot, I always say that first chapter is the one that kind of separates who's going to become a professional pilot. Not only is it literally your first pilot license, right? But people come into that first chapter from a wide variety of backgrounds, right? Physically, the ability to study, grit, all these kind of things. People come from a really wide variety of backgrounds, and that initial license is your standardization. Like, if you can make it through this, you'll very likely succeed through instrument and commercial, right? I think the numbers are less than 50% of private pilots complete, or student pilots complete their private pilot license, right? Yeah. That's the pyramid, but then it actually gets much better, instrument and commercial and forward.
Okay. Yeah, and it like you said, there's different types of people out there. So you might have somebody who is a star academically and a star in sports, but somehow they just didn't quite have the hands. Or it could be the other way around. They're great with their hands, but they couldn't keep up academically. But they go on to do great things in other areas of life. Yeah,
no, it's absolutely true. We always say, and I forgot who told me this originally, that for every person in the cockpit, there's 50 jobs in support, right? Everything from maintenance, fueling, air traffic controllers, and all those things. So there's plenty of ways to kind of develop that passion for aviation that might not be in the cockpit. So coming back to that initial training, what are some things that might be different? So, for example, this 10-hour minimum that I mentioned, the trend in the commercial aviation industry is actually to push the solo farther back, right? So you go to academies like ours, and your solos are rarely below 20 hours, and often in the curriculum kind of push into 30 hours, right? We do a lot of stuff to get that student ready so that when they solo, there's very little risk of, it's a risk reward kind of a situation where we want them to have, a win very early on in their training, right? But you want to mitigate as little risk as possible. Right. So while an independent instructor might get somebody out there soloed in under 10 hours, at academies, you'll rarely see it below 20 or 30 hours. But the student is, there's a world of difference between a 20, 30-hour pilot and a 10-hour pilot. Literally 3 times as much experience.
Right. And I think that, I think that's one thing the Air Force does pretty well is the standardization and expectations in their training. If you go to a civilian, any old civilian FBO and get an instructor, there's a large spectrum of the types of instructors you can get, from polished and professional to not quite as polished and professional. Sure. And military, they're very good at the structure on memorizing boldface, which is, you will know verbatim, and when you have to write it down every week, the boldface, which is the measures you take for certain emergencies. And you have to get every period and dash correct or you fail. And the expectations are so clear cut and the structure is so clear that that the information and the habit patterns are drilled into you much faster than if you don't have that type of structure. And then that makes the measurements of your performance more clear cut as well, because you will be able to do this in this way 2 times or so before we clear you to go solo. And I think that's something, it's a skill to learn and a skill that all pilots have, right? So I'm saying the Air Force is really good at this and maybe takes it to another level, but it's a skill that all pilots need to develop. And it's that ability to treat things very structured, very disciplined, and accomplish it in that way.
That makes sense. So So let's step forward a little bit. You've got your wings. Was your first assignment the F-15 squadron or something else?
Yes. Yeah. So out of pilot training, I was assigned to F-15Cs. F-15C Eagle is a two-engine, two-tail fighter that is all air-to-air. So we don't do air-to-ground. So that F-16 flight I told you about back originally when we did dog fighting, or as we call it, BFM, basic fighter maneuvers, really sold me on the air-to-air mission. And so I went to the F-15C. Our training was at Tyndall Air Force Base in Florida. And I did that before I went there, I went to Introduction to Fighter Fundamentals. So that was another 4-month training in the T-38, where we learned the basics of air-to-air fighting to prepare us for the F-15. Then we went to the F-15 training, which was another 7 months. After that 7 months of training, now I'm officially an F-15C pilot. I went to my first assignment in Mountain Home Air Force Base in Idaho to fly the F-15C for 3 years.
Nice. So only 3 years? And then you made the move over to B2? What prompted that?
Yeah, well, assignments in the military are commonly about 3 years. So you move from one assignment to another, and they just like to move people around to spread knowledge and not let people get stagnant. And I actually went from that job, instead of doing another flying job, I went to a desk job working in a command center in Hawaii. And after I did 3 years at a desk, then I applied to the B2, and I came to the B2 then in 2010. So I had about 3 years in the F-15, 3 years at a desk, and then came to the B2.
All right. So tell us about that, because it's, of course, it's the shadow, right? It's this kind of a elusive airplane, which you don't see very much. You might see it out at an air show. They're all based in Missouri, if I understand that correctly, right? And so all missions begin in Missouri?
Yes.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, so there's only 20 of them. There were 21. We lost one in Guam in 2008. But yeah, it's super cool. If you get a chance to see it, you're right, they're not out there too often. And the flight path, coincidentally, on depending on the winds, flight path will take the B2s over our house. And even though I've flown them for 10 years, I still run outside with my kids, or if they're in bed, I run outside by myself to watch it fly over because it looks so cool. Yeah. And we were supposed to build 120 of them, but then the save money and the Cold War kind of ended. So let's save money and just make 21 of them. But yeah, it was really an honor and super cool to get to see one up close. You can see them in the museum, obviously YouTube, but it's much cooler if you can see it overhead.
Very closely in person.
Yeah. And then the training for that was about 6 months also. And yeah, the first flight, much different than fighters, right? So fighters, I told you, I like sports. I like roller coasters. It's an active event like playing basketball where it's you versus somebody else. The B2 is not, it's a little less maneuverable and a little slower than an airliner. So it's a different type of flying, but it's still incredibly cool to look out the window down the wing line of that black bat wing and just realize what you're doing.
So one of the things I was reading about the B2 just the other day in preparation was about the incredible length of some of these sorties, right? I think like some of them go 40, 70 hours on a sortie. You'll fly to the other side of the world and back. That's pretty intense. I mean, even our long haul guys, you know, maybe like a 14-hour flight and there's multiple crews. Very different.
Yep. So if we were to fly, say we went to Operation Odyssey Dawn in Libya, and we did Kosovo in the late 90s. We were the first ones into Afghanistan in 2001 after 9/11, and amongst the first ones into Iraq in 2003. And so for those missions, we took off from Whiteman Air Force Base, and then you can get over to, say, Libya and back in about 30 hours or so. The longest flight ever, however, was going into Afghanistan after 9/11. So that we took off from Missouri, went west. So, you know, the rest of the way across the country, across the Pacific, right? If you look at a globe, the Pacific Ocean is almost half the globe.
Going to the other side of the world.
Yeah, all the way across the Pacific and then across Asia, down around through Thailand, into the Indian Ocean, then up through Pakistan and Afghanistan. And that was like 30 some hours. And then they had to go 8 hours out and landed in Diego Garcia, an island in the Indian Ocean. So that was a 46-hour mission, was the longest mission.
46 hours.
Yeah, so that's like you getting in an airplane right now, and we all go eat dinner, and then we go to sleep, and then we get up and have breakfast and go to school, and we have dinner again, and then go to sleep again, and then get up and eat breakfast and go to school, and then you land. That's how long the 46-hour mission is, and it's just 2 pilots. There's a really small space behind with a toilet that has a lid over it so you can put stuff on it, and just barely enough space to lay down so you can take an hour nap maybe on that. And now FAA ICAO rules are that, you know, over a certain amount of time, you have to have an augmented crew. So instead of 2 pilots, you have to have 3. Then over another a certain amount of time, you have to have 4 pilots. So the entire crew can go back and nap for 4 hours while the other crew takes over. Yeah. So we have waivers to those rules to allow us to just have 2 pilots for the duration of that flight.
So really, it sounds like it's mostly about endurance. You're like a marathon runner of a pilot, right?
Yeah, that is endurance for sure. I mean, you know, especially at my age, it's been a long time since I pulled all-nighters in college and with buddies and stuff like that. So it's all about just getting good sleep, eating right, you know, drinking some caffeine and taking a nap and managing your sleep cycles.
Yeah, no, it's funny. So, I mean, speaking about that crew rest kind of rules, I was talking to one of our alumni who's now flying for Atlas Cargo and doing the Pacific and doing like Narita and Sydney and all these kind of things, and about the multiple crews and they rotate through and, you know, how it's actually, you know, pretty sweet. and they have a good time of it. You know, as long as they don't, you know, too much weather, things like that. But talk about the opposite of it. It's really pushing the edge of, I think, what a human being can do, who is like the brain and soul of this airplane, flying to the other side of the world, doing their mission, but not flying back. So they landed in the Indian Ocean before having a return flight. That's interesting.
Yeah, they landed at Diego Garcia. It's owned by the UK, by Great Britain. And they kept the engines running, and the crews got out, and another crew got in and flew the airplane home. They pre-positioned that crew.
So is that because like the aircraft itself is so specialized, so special really that they're always in the U.S. They're not allowed to kind of stay anywhere else?
Right. It has to do with the security of it, as well as just the maintenance requirements of the stealth characteristics, as well as weapons loading and other things that made it need to come back home.
Sure. Well, very specialized if you're working on the B2. Really interesting. You might not be at liberty to share, but I mean, are there any special missions you can think of, or anything that was interesting in your time you spent with the Air Force or with the B2 program?
Well, for me with the B2, I had one flight from Diego. So, you know, we haven't gone to war a whole lot. We're not used in the Middle East very often, so we haven't seen a lot of combat. But I got to fly from Diego Garcia home. So that last leg, that was 29 hours for me. And if you look at a globe, Diego Garcia, if you go around the Pacific Ocean, it's actually 13 time zones. So it's a long way around. Yeah. And you can't park near the poles because that would take us through countries we don't want to take the B2. So I got to do that. And then last fall, I flew on a mission over the North Pole. So that was a 20-hour flight over the North Pole and a little bit towards the other end to show our would-be adversaries what we can do, and synchronized with some other aircraft as well from all parts of the globe. So that was really, really neat, really cool, really eerie flying over the North Pole. When you realize how big it is up there and over the North Pole, if we had say an engine fire, it would be a 4-hour drive. Wow. A 4-hour flight from there to get to the nearest emergency landing field.
Interesting. Yeah, the world is massive. And it's one of those things that I think pilots have a unique visibility on, right? When you're at ground level, okay, you know, you look at the space around you, even local pilots, all right, you get a better idea of it. But when you're at altitude, seeing the horizon, looking out over the ocean, it just definitely gives you a different perspective.
Absolutely.
Different perspective of the Earth. So let's kind of switch gears a little bit and talk about aspiring pilots, people that maybe want to get to the Air Force or interested in kind of going that route. What should somebody be doing now? You know, if you're in high school or in college and you're thinking this might be something I want to do.
Okay. Now for all of you out there, it all depends on what I say, and how you receive this will depend on where you are in life, how old you are, how much you've gone to inspirational, motivational speakers and such. Because I'm not into cheesy things, but I'm going to say some things that might appear cheesy depending on your your perspective. But work with all your heart at everything you do, right? So if you haven't heard that, then this is a golden nugget for you. If you have heard it, then I need to reinforce it. And if you've heard it a dozen times, then just remind yourself that it's important. Work it with all your heart at whatever you do, because anything you do, if you're swinging a hammer framing houses, if you do that with all your heart, as hard as you can, that will make you the person you need to be to become a fighter pilot or a B-2 stealth bomber pilot. I am telling you, it is not what you know or who you know, it is your character that will make you get to where you want to go. Because you can't fake it, you can't cram the night before for life. It is all about developing who you are as a person. How is that for a bowl of cheesiness? But
That's
I mean,
good. No, it's
next.
true. You really gotta do your best. You gotta throw yourself into the work. You know, I've got two boys in Boy Scouts and Cub Scouts, and what's their motto? Try your best. You know, the Cub Scouts, try your best. Right?
Yeah, there was a study done on toddlers and when they learned the alphabet, because you guys aren't there yet, but you have toddlers, parents want their kids to learn the alphabet. Oh, look, my kid's only 18 months old and he's saying the alphabet. There is no correlation to how early a kid knows the alphabet and their success in life, measured by crime or salary. The correlations, nor on elementary school grades. There is a correlation to their ability to handle stress and conflict and get along well with other people at those young ages. There is a correlation with that and success in adult life, which leads me to another one is integrity. Get it if you don't have it. I don't know where they sell it, but you got to get it. It goes right along with working really hard at whatever you do. Yeah. Here's another slightly different one, but interesting that I would say is if you can split from the masses, split from the norm, split from the wave of what is popular, there's a pretty good chance you will end up on a path for success. Because generally speaking, what happens if you were like, hey, it's Friday night, let's go to the movies. And you're like, oh, I want to read the Far Aim, right? Like a nerd, you know, and I'm not saying you have to read the Far Aim on Friday night, but like Einstein sat under a tree and read math books. That was out of the norm. There's a certain norm that we're expected to do with our Saturdays and with our Saturday nights and how we're supposed to act and walk and the things that are supposed to be cool to us and be fun. Mm-hmm. And like my kids, they're in one sport. I'm trying to teach them piano, and that's pretty much the norm. But if you want to be super good at one thing, you may not do those things that are the norm. And we throw kids into a classroom in public school with a whole bunch of other 17-year-olds. Well, what's your influence then? It's all these other 17-year-olds. Yeah. Don't be afraid to break away from them and seek, you know, elderly wisdom. I knew a guy in college that was awesome at guitar, and he broke from the norm. He spent his Saturday nights practicing guitar. Van Halen, another example.
You know, let's take a moment there because, you know, pilots are kind of a rare breed, right? Less than 2% of the people in the country have even a private pilot's license, right? And so, you know, when you get to your instrument or commercial, you're a fraction of a percent, especially around the world. In the US, it's relatively easy to go to your local flight school, local airport, watch airplanes, you know, meet a pilot, go for that discovery flight that I was talking about. If you're sitting in India or Peru or something like that, it's a whole nother world. It seems almost impossible, right? Yeah. So it's a very special thing. So when I find, like I mentioned, that a young person that kind of has that clarity vision, like, I want to do this, man, you got to follow that lane. I don't think you'll be happy doing anything else.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I was thinking about that as I was thinking about this break from the norm concept is by virtue of being where you are right now, watching this video and being a student in aviation, you already are breaking that norm in America because it's not the typical thing. Like every boy in America plays baseball or something like that, but they don't offer aviation classes in most high schools. So you have to go out on your own and have this unique interest and pursue it. So you're already going down that path.
Yeah. You know, I have to say that there's actually quite a big kind of outreach happening for younger people to come into aviation because of the pilot shortage. I know the Air Force has their pilot shortage as well. It's, you know, the industry being where it is, it kind of got put on pause, but it's going to come back super strong. And we're already hearing from our airline partners that they want to open up the hiring right away. And so Embry-Riddle and AOPA have these great programs where they're putting out curriculums into the high schools. We had Embry-Riddle brought over 22 high school students for discovery flights about a month ago. Wow. And man, really interesting what they're doing out there. It's a kind of a free curriculum. They're looking a lot at drones and kind of a little bit broader than just pilots, right? Drones, maintenance, air traffic control, kind of a general kind of aviation orientation. But you're right. In small town USA, most places there really isn't somebody exposing you to this. Now, that's probably one of the benefits of the internet is that somebody can stumble across a video like this, right, and get advice from a pilot like yourself. Reach out in forums and kind of see what makes sense and how they can do it. Where in the past that just wasn't available. So, people got interested in aviation, sitting outside of the local airport fence and watching the airplanes take off, right? Or our remote control airplanes is a great way that people got into airplanes back in the day. Now it's a lot of Microsoft Flight Simulator, and the internet is doing quite a bit to get people's attention of what they're interested in.
Yeah, absolutely. And now that type of advice that I just gave then is not often what some people are looking for. They're looking for the gold nuggets. And that's,
Sure.
part of my theme is there is no golden nugget.
Nope.
But if you're looking for the practical advice, like, okay, well, what do I do tomorrow? It's just, you're probably already doing it. And that is go get your private pilot's license, get some hours, study real hard in school. And then if you want to go the route I did, then you research online initially. You can talk to a recruiter as well on how to apply for the Air Force Academy or ROTC, or just you can go to OTS. Now,
let's talk a moment about this pilot shortage that I mentioned a moment ago, right? Because the Air Force is in a pilot shortage, and they've, a lot of those Air Force pilots have moved into commercial aviation. That's kind of a classic route, right? Pilot gets great training, builds up their time, leadership, college educated. The airlines love you guys. And they have the restricted ATP down at 700 hours for you guys to kind of trying to entice you over. That's kind of a constant turnover. I mean, I guess people do their 20 years. Is that typical service in the Air Force?
It's usually, that's where you need to go to get your partial retirement. If you're in your commitment after pilot training is 10 years. So that would be, if you had a year of pilot training, about 11 or 12 years is when you can first get out of the Air Force.
All right. That's less than I thought, honestly. And then you've got kind of a variety of training. Like I know, for example, and we talked about this briefly the other day, certain airlines like Delta have a very strong military tradition. I think most airlines have a good contingent of military pilots. I don't know why Delta is so heavy on military pilots. But it's a flow that's proven itself pretty well. And so the Air Force is constantly recruiting in. And they're making quite a big effort to keep pilots as well, right? Retention bonuses and things like that. At what point, where is the Air Force now in its recruiting? Is it always kind of out there in need of pilots? Is it looking more at drones and things like that? Where is the Air Force in that?
Yeah, the Air Force definitely needs a lot of pilots at every level. And so some of it is retention, trying to entice them with bonuses and some other quality of life types of things. But it's not just the retention to keeping the pilots. They need to be able to train them faster as well. So they're doing things to improve the speed with which we train and the capacity of how many pilots we can train in the Air Force also. And they're experimenting with some unique ideas. We've been very methodical, like I said, about having this 13-month pilot training, and this is the way we do it. We're exploring, can we take somebody who has 300 hours at a aviation flight school or flew for the regionals or something and give them a shorter pilot training. We're exploring some ideas like that. But it is a challenge continually. And it's kind of just the military business model where we keep people flowing through and then kick them out the back door that makes us gives us the requirement to continually train more and put them through the pipeline.
Makes sense. And we're kind of coming to the end of our time, so I'm looking at Q&A. And the first question from NASA is, Tashola NASA, is your take on the retention issue. So tackle that one. Basically that the Air Force needs pilots, right? So if you've ever had that dream, you should apply, right? You should give it a go. It's a good one. And Mr. Jerry Kirby here asked if you fly privately and if you plan to after your retirement.
I've only flown a little bit privately. So after I got my private pilot's license, before going to pilot training, I didn't fly for years. And I got a few hours in the Cessna 152 to get my dad and my wife. A few years later, I took up my kids. So I haven't done a whole lot. I want to do a little bit more this summer. And yeah, I want to keep that as a hobby for sure. And maybe start instructing on the private pilots kind of level.
Beautiful. As someone who's very involved with the flight school here, Wayman Aviation Academy, we're always looking for senior pilots, whether you're retired Air Force or airline or 135, because the way the industry works is, the best students step into instructor roles, to build their time, kind of like a residency, right? But you really need those senior pilots to keep the standards like you were just talking about, right? The Air Force is very good about having kind of career instructors, I imagine, right? Where they're like the guy at the flight academy and focuses on this or that or the other. But in the world of commercial aviation, it's hard to get those senior people because they're off flying for the airlines, doing really well. And here's the funny part: a guy at 65 who's got 20,000 hours and all the experience in the world comes back to GA and they've got to learn how to fly by hand again. And it's pretty tough.
I can say the F-15 and the B-2 were both pretty easy to land. And the first time back in the Cessna 152 was a little shock for me because you felt every bump and you really had to be proactive to get that thing online.
So here's a question. You mentioned about the B2, you know, kind of being, you know, kind of older and it's time now. What's the automation like in a B2? Is it like gears and servos? Is it modern automation?
Yeah, so it's all fly-by-wire, all fly-by computers. It was designed in the 80s. It's got dozens and dozens of computers on it. If you count every box, it does a calculation and sends an output. But we, based on its aerodynamic, right? It doesn't have a tail, right? So it's not aerodynamically stable. So it is entirely dependent on the computers to tell it where to put the control surfaces. Not your stick. Your stick is just an input to the computer. And yeah, so we have 4 flight control computers for quad redundancy. Wow. Now, again, it came to life in 1990 or 1989. I think was the first flight, and at the time, it was obviously an incredible marvel of glass cockpit. And now we only paid for. We did get autopilot that it'll follow a blue line or follow a heading, and we got altitude hold as well. We do not have auto throttles though. We didn't pay for that, so we have to keep the throttles up and down.
Altitude hold on a 40+ hour mission sounds like great. I'll take it. Right, headings, that's great. Wow. Well, we're coming to the end of our time, Tim. It's been so wonderful having you here. You kind of shared our words of wisdom, but if you had any parting thoughts or if anybody wanted to reach out to you, you know, what's the best way to kind of pursue the Air Force, or any last thoughts you have to give to our viewers?
Hopefully you got something out of this and enjoyed it as well. The B2, yeah, it is super cool. It's I wake up every day and go, wow, this is pretty cool. I'm doing something I'd see on Discovery Channel. Yeah. One thing you didn't ask, people ask how fast it goes, a little slower than the airliner, how high it goes, you know, think about like an airliner. What you didn't ask was how do we eat, sleep, and poop? On a 44
you told me about the tiny toilet, which
yeah, right.
No. Never spend time in an RV.
We have a hot cup too, but we got an upgrade to a microwave. So
you have a microwave on board?
Yeah, that's about it. Nothing like the C-17. But wow. Yeah, I appreciate you having me on here, and I hope good luck to all you guys out there in what you're pursuing, whatever that path is. Like Waylon was saying, whether it's in the aircraft still, or going to another career field that's related or not. And if it's just for enjoyment, or if you're going down the path to civilian aviation or military aviation, I hope you work at it with all your heart and enjoy all that you do.
Thank you so much for giving us time this afternoon. Look forward to hearing more from you. Thank you, Lieutenant Colonel Tim Sutton. And make sure to look into the Air Force. It's the best flight school in the country, right? And a great way to launch your career into the skies. It's beautiful. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Have a good day.
You too. Have a great afternoon.